green zones not seen in between those without flesh or bone. Roam in the void, they avoid all detection. Interdimensional beings all connected. Angels and demons from spiritual realms engaged in a battle from heaven to hell. They dwell.
Good afternoon and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. Today is Thursday, May 4th, year of our Lord 2017. And you're listening to a Gen Pop Media production.
Yeah.
So, Dave, why don't you tell us about a little bit about the power of banking and currency?
Yeah, well, I was going to do a little presentation on how I was going to show you guys, our listeners, how to take over the world by manipulating currency. And before I get way into that, you guys were just talking about Trump, because there is something going on. You mentioned the Brexit vote, which was England basically exiting out of the European Union because of being trapped in the euro's currency system. Then you've got a woman by the name of Marine Le Pen, a 48-year-old woman. She's running for president of France. And I've been reading a few articles about her. She's running against two other guys, one named Macron. I'm not sure the other one, but she specifically, her whole platform is to dump France, to get France out of the Rothschild banking system and get them to print their own money. Then you've got, and Dave, I was going to ask you for your comments on this. I want to say his name is Rodrigo Duterte from the Philippines.
Perfectly pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
Who has gone out of his way. He's also said the exact same thing, which is we've got to dump the Rothschild banking monopoly. It's the most important thing to our country. And I've been somewhat down on Trump, but I was very happy to hear that he specifically wanted, or maybe did meet with Duterte this week.
He invited him to come to the White House.
Yeah, and Duterte.
They've talked on the phone.
Well, Duterte said that he's probably too busy. So
isn't he the one that said that Obama was a bastard?
Yes.
Okay.
Called him an MF-er too. He's trying to fight corruption. He talks out against the world banking system. So he's a complex guy.
There's a common denominator. Everyone that seems to either speak out against the Rothschild banks or is the head of a country that does not have a Rothschild bank,
right,
we view as these psychotic, despotic type rulers. You've got the Jong-ils in North Korea, Chavez in Venezuela. I mean, these guys are viewed as just horrible guys. It doesn't surprise me that Duterte is viewed as maybe he is, for all we know, maybe they are, but there is that common denominator. And Trump in the USA, I mean, as long as he's still getting railed every day when I look in the news, it does make me feel good because not because he's suffering, but because it would at least give the appearance that the powers that be are in opposition to his views and they're trying to mar him any way possible.
Well, yeah. See, you bring up Venezuela, and I want to make a quick point because this is important. Venezuela is a disaster because of Chavez. And now the guy's not Chavez anymore, it's somebody else. Mm-hmm. But these guys are Castro-type throwbacks. These are, they went out as socialists, but really they're communists, and they've destroyed their nations. Now, they may speak out against the World Bank, but what's their motivation? Because if their motivation isn't liberty, then it's just because they want the control instead.
Right.
So this is an important point because the Chavezes of the world are bad guys. I don't care what I mean, their people are starving when Venezuela was one of the agricultural centers of the planet. They grew everything. They produced all kinds of beef. I mean, that was where, now they can't even, they're rioting over powdered milk. This is absolutely happening. So speaking out against the world banking system is one thing, but what's the motivation behind it? If it is for liberty for their people, that's one thing. But if it's so they can have control, then it's just as evil. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So Duterte's an interesting guy. I like him. I love his, but because I'm kind of a sicko, I like some of the stuff he says. It's kind of refreshing to hear a leader.
Well, one thing you can say about Duterte that you can't say about some of these other leaders, he is loved it starts in Davao. The people in Davao love him.
Well,
because Davao is now like a gem of the Philippines after 20 years of Duterte rule.
But the metric isn't that the people love him. The metric is the results he produced, because the people in Germany loved Hitler too. So that's not well, a lot of them did. In fact, most of them did, because the Holocaust happened. So those people could have stopped it. But anyway, I mean, that's not really the metric. The metric is that, because people support dictators all the time. I mean, of course they love these guys. That's like they're starstruck. Look at China. They still worship Mao, and he murdered 50 million of their people. So that's not really a metric, but I think that it's true that overwhelmingly Filipinos love Duterte. Overwhelming. They couldn't even rig that election.
Yeah, it was
because it was too overwhelming.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? You were talking about these Germany loving Hitler, loving these different leaders, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm starting to believe is that I don't necessarily think that's true. I think you hear that from a media source. I think it's a propaganda. I think it's just like the Trump thing. Everybody hates Trump. Well, he got elected, right? Well, there's a lot of this media stuff going around now that's blatantly lying. Same stuff about Le Pen. They were talking about her not having a chance. She's no way she's going to win. But then they showed, this Macron shows up at this plant.
Is he the communist? Which one's the communist?
He's the globalist. He's a globalist.
Well, one of them's an actual communist, like part of the Communist Party.
Well, they're the only two left now.
Okay,
Yeah,
so maybe the communist got knocked off.
He was gone. Macron was part of the previous administration, but he came from Goldman Sachs, or he came from one of these people. So he
actually works for the Rothschild Bank.
So he's like a Labor Party guy, ish. If you were to look at Britain,
like Dave said, he's a Rothschild employee. So anyway, they show up at this factory in France, and none of these people cared about him being there. They were, not paying any attention.
Like Hillary.
Le Pen shows up, right? And all these people are cheering and greeting her and shaking her hands and everything. And they had to really cover this up. But there's footage of it out now. But the whole point of it is the media and all the things that people are saying. It's like, do they really love Castro? You heard so many people that came from Cuba.
Well, we have enough. We have enough footage and things that at the heyday of it, the people in Germany were gaga over Adolf Hitler. Look at the turnouts. But
that was propaganda, because he was propaganda based.
Yeah, but propaganda. When you see 1 million people in the street all saluting.
Yeah.
They're doing it. It's not like it was staged.
Well,
they didn't all have a gun to their head.
I would argue, like, you watch the footage of North Korea, where they all cry over Kim Jong-un or his father, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's all fake. If you don't do that, then there's consequences.
That's fair.
You know what I mean?
That's fair, sure. Yeah, that's fair.
After having my nose in this book for the last couple months, there is no doubt in my mind that it was not the majority, but there was a percentage of the German population that they saw exactly the problems with Hitler rising to power. And a lot of people went along with it out of fear.
Sure.
There was a law passed in Germany after the Nazis were in power, and I'm guessing this would have been the early 30s, where you could turn your neighbor in if you didn't think. So, for instance, if you lived in a community, you'd have to go out and make it seem as if you completely supported the Nazis, because if you didn't, your neighbor might turn you in, and kabam, the Gestapo comes in and takes you out and takes you to some death camp somewhere for you never to be seen from again. And as I've been going through and just reading just the backstory of the quotes that are being assembled for this book, there was a lot of that was based on fear. and they were acting the part.
That absolutely could be, which is what frightens me about this whole populist nationalist mantra that's going on. Because this is eventually what this leads to. Eventually, this is what this leads to.
Well, it kind of catches on. I think I agree with that. You know, when you think everything's good, you think, say Hitler. Let's take Hitler for example. Everyone's saying, "Oh, he's doing all these great things." You're hearing all this stuff. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon, right? And so, what's going on in the U.S. right now? You've got these Antifa, you've got Black Lives Matter, you've got all these different communist type groups, right? Which I think are actually tied to communism.
Yeah, at least Marxism for
right.
very least.
All these people are getting all these young people on board. They don't even know what they're promoting, but they're all jumping on board. They're all into it. You know,
and go. You could even use the same example, some more modern. Just look at the Patriot Act, and this seems kind of minor, but when that was drafted, you had people all over the place defending this thing. And what was the thing? Oh, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to hide. So look how this monster has exactly done what we said it would do. And now you got memory banks being built that are storing every single. Right now, we are being recorded and put into a hard drive somewhere for what? You see, so it's turned into a complete monster, which was warned this would happen, but you're just paranoid. You must be up to something. You know, it's Stasi tactics. And the whole neighbor turning the other neighbor in, that didn't stop when the war ended. East Germany really took that to the Stasi, that is what they did. And it's boy, it can turn so quick.
But it's coming from every angle.
It's coming
from every angle.
And then, of course, like what Dave's bringing up on the show is that you got all this fake money behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And look what it funds.
Well, that's what we are going to talk about. And I think when we get done running through this example, you'll see how little control the president of a nation really has, especially if his country has a currency based on a central type of bank. So we're gonna. If you guys are ready, I can start. Start going through it.
Bring it.
Well, there's only 3 countries left, correct, Dave?
From what I understand, yes. Which I think it's Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela.
Cuba is what's said here.
Okay, but we're down to a handful.
There's a funny meme on here. I'll just share with you guys before you get started. They show Bill Gates, a picture of Bill Gates, how it's impressive that he's worth 61 billion Federal Reserve notes. And then they show Evelyn, the Rothschild. With the exception of 3 countries, every unit of currency on this planet is an IOU to my family. So
it is.
With
and
that,
we're going to explain how that works, and we're going to do a simple example. But every dollar of debt that exists anywhere on the planet outside of Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and a couple countries that do not have currency based on a central bank, all of it started off as debt to the families that own the Federal Reserve Bank and the other central banks of the world, which ultimately is the family of the Rothschilds. And that meme is right on, to be honest with you. All right, so are we ready?
Shoot.
Listo.
All right, because we're going to talk about basically how to take over the world by providing currency to a nation. And, of course, this is one of the many weapons that are being used against us. It is not the only weapon, but we're dealing with an ancient evil that knows humanity, knows government, knows how people think, how things operate, has had a lot of experience. And certainly there are many other irons in the fire, many other irons in the fire. But we're just going to talk about the banking and currency portion, and you're going to, hopefully, by the end of this, see how powerful that one tool alone, and from that one tool or weapon, all others can be made whole and can operate, except for the ones that are maybe of a spiritual nature. So a lot of people, in fact, I'm going to start off with a quote by Barry Goldwater, if you guys remember who he was. He was a U.S. Senator through the 60s, 70s. He wrote a book called With No Apologies. One of the quotes that's going to appear in our book is from Barry Goldwater. He said this in 1979. He said, "Most Americans have no real understanding of the operations of the international moneylenders. The accounts of the Federal Reserve have never been audited. It operates outside the control of Congress and manipulates the credit of the United States." I could cite I could cite thousands, frankly, but this begins with George Washington, our first president. And you got to understand, the reason that we had a revolution in this country, it was a revolution separating ourselves from the royalty of England. But what that really meant is we were separating ourselves from the Rothschild-run bank that controlled the royalty of England. That was the purpose of the formation of our country. That was what we ran from in Europe, which we ultimately ended up giving back to them, which we're going to cover in a minute. But even George Washington said this, and he said this in 1787. This was a letter that he wrote to the Rhode Island governor named Jabez Bowen. And he said this in many different places. But he said, "Paper money has had the effect in your state that it will always have, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open a door to every species of fraud and injustice." James Madison, who was the fourth president, said something similar. So this is now 13 years later. And this theme continues from the beginning of our country right up through today. His quote was, "History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance." So I just wanted to set the table that, number one, most people don't really understand all the levers and pulleys behind the scenes of how money and banking work. But we're getting a lot of these cryptic warnings from presidents. These aren't yahoos or guys wearing tinfoil hats. These guys are warning of the dangers of giving away our right to print our own money, which we did. So any questions on any of that so far?
Not a question, but an interesting, well, not coincidence because we know that doesn't exist, but I find it interesting that the Barry Goldwater quote came right about the time that we were removed from the gold standard.
We completely got off the gold standard. I'd say it was in 1972. It was under Nixon. And that was we lost the Revolutionary War in 1913 when we allowed the Federal Reserve Act to get passed. And it took another 50, 60 years basically for, the remaining, let's call them strongholds to get wiped out. But that is what I think you're referencing. But all throughout history, even in the year 1913, we all know who Charles Lindbergh was, the guy that flew across the Atlantic. Well, his father was a congressman in the United States, and he was very well aware of the dangers of the Federal Reserve Act. And even the night, in fact, I'm going to read you the quote and then the entry from this book we've got coming out. But in 1913, he says this on the floor of Congress. He says, "The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed." Now, that's his quote, and it's meant to get you interested in reading the backstory of it. And the backstory on this particular quote reads like this. "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover the check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. Now, those are my comments. Quote now, this is from Charles Lindbergh, another quote, or continuation. The new law, this is the Federal Reserve Act, and he's arguing this the day before it's passed. This is December 22nd, 1913. He's in a frenzy because he knows if this law gets passed, this country is over, but it's just going to take a while for us to figure it out. He said, the new law will create inflation whenever the trusts, the bankers, want inflation. It may not do so immediately, but the trusts want a period of inflation because all the stocks they hold have gone down. Now, if the trust can get another period of inflation, they figure they can unload the stocks on the people at high prices during the excitement and then bring in a panic and buy them back at low prices. So he's talking about his understanding of these powers being able to manipulate inflation, which doesn't seem like a big deal to us because from the day we were born, we hear the word inflation in the news every single night. And we kind of get desensitized to it. So I put together a simple, a very basic, simplified breakdown of how the provision of currency affects the people. And we already discussed in many other places that the people behind the Federal Reserve Bank and the central banks, these people literally praise Satan, and they really do want to take over the world and enslave everyone and put chips in us, just like the Bible said. So it's very hard to see because the devil is in the details, literally. So we're going to do a simplified run-through of how this works, and you guys have heard before my super simplified version. This one's going to have just a few extra wrinkles that are going to teach us about how the Treasury and the central banks, what the relationship is. But understand this, listeners, there is a plot in this country to enslave all of us. Don't go thinking of bad guys like Dr. No or Dr. Evil. The guys we're talking about, they wear suits, they are organized, they're coordinated, and they mean what they say, and they've been working towards this now for a long time. So we're going to take a look at a simple answer. We're not going to, for this example, we're not going to talk about things like inflation, population growth, whether currency is gold-backed or collateralized, and we're not going to discuss fractional reserve banking or macroeconomics either. We're going to expand on that very simplified example that I've used before. So for this example, we're going to pretend that we're going to start a nation. Now, no nations start like this. Typically, they start through people coming together and getting organized. It's a much more organic process, but bear with us because we're gonna cut some corners for simplicity's sake. And we're going to call this country Utopia Land, the perfect country. And it's one of many nations in the world. And to start off, let's say that this nation has 1,000 residents. They're all money earners. In this hypothetical example, there's no children. And we're going to talk about how an enterprising person, let's say I wanted to take over this country. I'm going to show you how we can do it. So, any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So this little nation's got 1,000 people. It's got a government sector and it's got a private sector, which means it's got teachers and doctors and journalists that work for news agencies or newspapers. It's got builders. It's got politicians, businessmen, entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, military guys, farmers. You understand? It's got a whole society. Okay? And like the United States, this country wants to be a quote-unquote a free country. So it sets up what we have now, which is called a representative government. That is, we elect representatives, and they're in office for finite terms, and there's turnover there, making, it keeps us from ever having a dictator or a permanent ruler, and we elect them, so there's a sense of choice and freedom. And it doesn't matter for this example whether we're dealing with a republic, a democracy, even a dictatorship. It really doesn't matter. But for what it's worth, we're going to assume that our little form of government is a republic, which is what the U.S. was supposed to be. And there's not a huge difference between a republic and a democracy. But one of the, demi, which is half, basically meaning half of the people are represented by one party, the other half by another. Hence, we have a two-party system, a democracy. But there was a time in this country where Republicans and Democrats and the Whig Party and the Socialist Party and all these other parties all could supply a candidate. We've actually gotten very far from that. So we also want our nation to appear to be, we want it to actually be free, and we want it to appear also to be free, not just to us inside this nation, but also to the outside world, because we want to attract people to it, tourism, global trade, things of that nature. Okay? We all good so far?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So we're all set to get our nation started, but there's no way for us to trade things easily. So before there's any currency, if Dave, for instance, if you need something, maybe your skill is weaving carpets, I don't know, and let's say you need to buy some plates for your house so you can serve dinner on them. Well, you might weave a carpet for Howard, who's a potter, and he might make you some plates, and you change. It's a barter system. Early ancient cultures typically had a similar arrangement until they started finding some exotic materials like gold and silver, or wampum, if you remember, like the Indians used at one time. So the system is okay, but if you need some plates and Howard doesn't want a rug, we've got a problem. You don't have a way to get those plates. So you certainly could offer, let's say, your labor, but maybe he doesn't need that either. So you're limited in how you can trade and what you can trade for. So one way to solve that is, let's say, in this example, I want to take over the world, or I want my family to take over the world, and I'm enterprising. So I suggest, why don't we have a common currency? And that way, Dave, you won't have to make a carpet. You can do whatever you want to do. You will earn money doing that, and then you can just buy the plate you need from Howard. You understand the picture. And that currency originally was to be backed by something of value. Now, for us, it has typically been gold. As recently as John F. Kennedy, who put $4 billion into circulation of silver-backed dollars. I think that's one of the things that got him killed. So as recently as the 1960s, we were playing with ways to get ourselves out from the clamp that the Rothschild banks have had on our nation. Either way you slice it, whether it is a Rothschild central bank or whether it's a government printing its own currency, there are definitely some benefits in a currency. But to keep a currency from essentially becoming valueless, it was always backed by something. But there are still a lot of dangers with paper currency, and you'll see what those are as we go through this example, because when we got off of our paper currency, we opened ourselves up for a coming tyranny. And this is what men like Charles August Lindbergh, the father of the pilot, and many other people were trying to warn us against. In fact, he's not the only. These warnings have come throughout all of history. In 1922, John F. Hylan, who was the mayor of New York City, his comment was, and these are all sourced and verified quotes, like I saw them in their original. These aren't, some internet rumor. his quote, 1922, he had a lot to say about this. And if I'm not mistaken, you'll find a common denominator in anyone that is trying to speak out against the Rothschild banks. They either end up in prison or dead. And John F. Hyland had 3 attempts on his life before he finally died. But in 1922, he said, "To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, use their leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of the corrupt big businessmen." That was 8 years after the passing, 9 years after the passing of the Federal Reserve Act. In 1932, Louis T. McFadden, he was a congressman. So these aren't dummies. These are people that were in the know. They were in the most powerful circles in the United States government. Louis T. McFadden, and frankly, he might have been the one that had the 3 attempts on his life. And I'm sorry for that confusion, but I'll figure that out during the break. He said, "The Federal Reserve Board has cheated the government of the United States and the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the national debt." So these are pretty strong words that we're getting, which we get all throughout history, even up to today, in which even our current President Trump has recognized that there is an evil about these banks, but most people don't understand it. We talked a little bit about the leaders of some other nations that seem to be cluing in on this, and it is a very real threat. So we're coming up on a break. We've got our little hypothetical nation set up. So why don't we, Howard, take a break, and when we come back, we're going to start with year number 1 of what is going on behind the scenes with our little utopia land, and we're going to quickly take it from year 1 through year 60. And I'm going to show you that by how year 60, I will be in complete control of this nation. Okay, so are we ready to continue?
Yeah, bring it, man.
Okay.
My only question
So
is,
it
what
is
was my
day
job?
1 of our utopian society, utopia land. And this is the critical part for me, is I've got to set up a central bank. Now, it's called a central bank. What does that even mean? A central bank is different than the kind of banks we see on the street, because a central bank only has 2 kinds of customers. One is governments, and the other is other banks. Now, we're only going to be talking about a central bank that deals with the government. We're not going to get into the portion of this where central banks are lending to other banks. I've certainly used that example before when I've given you the other similar samples like this. But central bank has basically it's got 2 customers, and then it's got 3 main functions. And I'm sure you could argue that it does a few other things, or, that's fine. Here's what's important. Number 1, the central bank is owned by me privately. I own it. It is my personal bank. And yes, that is the case for the Federal Reserve. It is not a federal or government bank whatsoever. It does have a name that would imply that. And since I want to take over this little utopia, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to call it Dave Hooper's bank. I'm going to call it the Utopian Federal Reserve, okay? Because I don't want people to get suspicious. The 3 main functions of this bank is to provide currency, and that is literally, it's sort of changing as we get into the electronic era, but for most of our lives, it's been in the form of actually printing paper money, or sometimes what is called fiat money. The bills that are in your wallet are fiat currency. As part of that first responsibility, I'm also going to protect against counterfeiting, because we wouldn't want our enemies to go run off $1 billion worth of currency and come over and buy a bunch of critical businesses in utopia land. So we're also going to be protecting the currency so that it's not counterfeited. And so it's to provide currency and then to do it for either governments, that's the second responsibility, or other banks. And just to gloss over the other bank part, sometimes a very large bank like, these are banks that would own Bank of America. They might borrow money from the central bank at a super low interest rate, and then that bank can then go out and loan money to individual citizens where they can purchase automobiles or mortgages or things of that nature. But understand, whether it is government dollars or private dollars, they all come from the exact same place, which is this Rothschild family-run enterprise. All right. But in utopia land, I'm the banker. All right? And again, to avoid suspicion, I'm calling it the Federal Reserve Bank of Utopia, even though it is not federal at all. And we know that our utopian government, it's going to need money. It's going to need money for public works, for roads, schools, assembling an army. And the government needs, now this is a real federal agency, it needs a Treasury Department. And the U.S. has a Treasury Department as well. So the government has a Treasury office, and they are federal. And our first day in business, we got 1,000 people in the nation, and we're going to say, let's put $50,000 per citizen into circulation. So the Treasury officer of Utopia Land calls me up at my central bank, okay, and says, hey, we want $50 million of circulation. And I say, sounds great. And I asked them, what are you going to put up in exchange? What's your collateral in this? What are you going to do? I'm going to purchase from him Treasury bills. And the treasurer says, great. And what that means is I'm going to hand over $50 million. I'm going to print off of a printer in my back room $50 million worth of bills. And then I'm going to send it over in an armored truck to the Utopia's treasury, okay? And that $50 million then is going to start to get dispersed. There's a budget that's presented to the Congress every year. They have to approve it. $5 million for roads, $3 million for scientific experimentation, $4 million for police department. You get the picture, right? Okay.
Yes.
Now, what I've accepted in exchange for giving that $50 million is I have taken $50 million in government notes, sometimes also known as T-bills or Treasury bills. And basically what these notes are, this is a financial instrument that is backed by a government. And we're going to say, for example, that Utopia's government agrees to pay 3% interest on the Treasury bills that I'm now going to own, okay? So at the end of that first day, I have given $50 million out to Utopia Land, and I start earning 3% interest on $50 million. That's 3% per year, okay? Everyone right now is happy. There's money now in circulation. Policemen are getting paid. Teachers are getting paid. Things are hunky-dory. People are happy. Now, along the way, I've also negotiated the fact that, I don't want to just, I need to have a little control here. So why don't you let me handle the collection of taxes from your people. Because ultimately, it is the labor of the people that makes these treasury bills worth anything. And the treasurer basically has to say, yeah, you're right. So I then set up a private collection agency called, let's say, the IRS. We'll call it the URS, the Utopian Revenue Service. Now understand, these IRS or URS employees, they're not federal either. They're my private employees that work at my private bank. And we set it up so that once a year, we have everyone in Utopia land file an income tax return, and they send their government payment. They don't send it to the government of Utopia. They send it to me personally, okay? And then what I do at the end of that year is I remove the amount that is owed to me for the interest on those treasury bills, and I send the remainder to the Utopian Treasury. At the end of the first year, there is $50 million in circulation. There are 1,000 people in this nation. Let's assume that the average income is $30,000 per citizen, very similar to what it is in the United States. And let's also say that the government tax rate is going to average out to 20% per person. Okay, you all following me so far?
Yep.
And now, any of you enterprising young guys there able to tell me what the revenue of the government's going to be per year in this nation? We take 1,000 people, we multiply that times $30,000 per person, and then we multiply that times 20% or times 0.2. That means the amount that will be recouped, or I should say that the government will generate in tax dollars, comes out in the very first year to $6 million. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Yeah.
1,000 people times $30,000 per person, that's $30 million. And the government is only going to take 20% of your taxes. So that means that cumulatively, these 1,000 people are sending $6 million to me, to my private bank. Well, it's the end of year one, and how much interest is owed so far? Anyone?
3%.
3% of how much?
$6 million.
No, 3% of $50 million. That's how much I got in treasury bills. I got $50 million with the T-bill.
Oh, so, okay.
Okay.
It's on every dollar.
Okay?
Okay.
So, $6 million has been sent by the people to me. I'm going to remove my 3% interest on $50 million. That's $1.5 million. And I'm going to send the remaining $4.5 million to the Treasury. Sounds good, right?
Right.
They get their coffers refilled. They're doing their thing. But what's interesting here is that by the end of year one, the people don't know it yet, but they're already screwed. Because at the end of year one, how much money is now in circulation?
$56 million.
How much?
56, right?
Well, in circulation, it's hard to say, right?
Well, what is now in circulation is actually 48.5 million.
Okay.
Basically, everything's still in circulation except for the 1.5 million that I took out this particular first year. Okay?
Yeah, and there's still $50 million in debt.
Well, exactly. That's why I said the society is already screwed and they don't know it, because there will never, ever, by design, there will never be enough money in circulation to ever pay the debt. Now, wait, just wait till you see the power of exponential interest income. Okay, so this process continues every year for, let's say, 10 years. Every year for the first 10 years, I'm pulling $1.5 million out of circulation. How much is in circulation in the 10th year?
35.
$35 million, exactly. All right, well, $35 million in circulation, guess what, guys? Things are getting a little tight. You know, we've had to cut a few budgets here and there. We can't, you know, we're having trouble getting the budget passed through Congress because there's just not enough money. There's some things aren't, you know, we've got the people and everything ready to do it, but we don't have the currency to pay these people. So the treasurer of Utopia gives me a call and tells, hey, things are tight. We need to get our currency circulation back to 50 million. And I say, okay, sounds good. He says we need $15 million so we can get back to our sweet spot of 50 million in circulation. I say, fine. And we cut another deal. I print off some more bills, $15 million worth. I then send the $15 million in an armored truck to the Utopian Treasury. He puts those in circulation. Now we're back to 50 million in circulation. Everyone's happy. Now, at the end of that 11th year, what's the big picture look like? Well, now I'm owed $65 million. I have now given $65 million in bills to the Utopian Treasury, for which I'm earning 3%. Does anyone have a calculator? 3% of 65 million?
19.5.
1.95. For the sake of simplicity, let's just round that up to 2 million per year is now coming to me from the population. Makes sense, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
There is, as soon as I delivered that second wave of bills, there is once again $50 million in the Treasury. Everyone's happy. But now I'm earning interest on $65 million. There's only $50 million in circulation, but $65 million is owed. We're only a decade out. At the end of that 11th year, we're doing our normal taxes as usual. I collect from 1,000 people, average income of $30,000 at 20%. The number's still $6 million. Remember, we're not going to talk about inflation or population growth in this example. So at the end of that 11th year, my personal bank, I get $6 million from the people of Utopia. But now, instead of sending them $4.5 million, I'm only sending them $4 million because my interest payment is now up to $2 million a year. You guys follow me?
Yeah.
Okay. Politicians come and go. Another 10 years goes by. I am withholding $2 million per year in interest. How much is in circulation in the 20th year? We made ourselves whole again in the 10th year because Utopian Treasury borrowed $15 million.
30.
But I'm taking now $2 million a year out for the last 10 years. What's the circulation right now?
30 million.
30.
Exactly.
30.
So now there's 30 million in circulation. Ooh, things, guess what? They're getting tight again. This reminds me of what happened 10 years ago. Remember when we had that period of government spending problems and budgetary problems, and the same thing starting to happen again. So it's year 21. The treasurer from Utopia, it's a new guy. It's always a new guy. Never in his position long enough really ever to even get what's going on. Politicians are coming and going. They don't really get what's going on. And he calls me up and says, Dave, we need more money. We got to get back to our sweet spot of 50 million in circulation, and I'm happy to oblige. We do the same thing again. This time I print off $20 million worth of currency, put it in an armored truck, send it to the Utopian Treasury. They give me $20 million worth of Treasury bills, which is backed by the labor of their people. Now, how much have I put? Now, if you at the end of that 20th year, in total, I have now put $85 million into the utopian treasury from the beginning of time,
Right.
which means they're paying me 3% interest on $85 million. But how much is in circulation
50.
the minute that armored truck arrives at the treasury?
50.
Still is $50 million. Okay. So at the end of the 21st year, we collect our taxes, we do our thing, and nothing has changed. Income hasn't grown. Now, no inflation, no new population. How much money am I collecting from the people?
$6 million.
$6 million. That does not change. Except now, I'm going to keep 3% of the $85 million that I've printed off for the Treasury. 3% of $85 million is roughly $2.55 million. So I keep my $2.55 million, and I'm going to round it just to $2.5 million just to make it easier. And I send the remaining amount, $3.5 million, to the utopian treasury. Now, keep in mind, year one, I was sending them $4.5 million. I'm only sending them now $3.5 million. Things in general are getting tighter constantly. Okay, you starting to see where this is going?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, year 30 comes along. Now I'm taking out $2.5 million per year, and I've done this for the last decade. Circulation at the end of the 20th year was $50 million. I've been taking out $2.5 million for 10 years. How much is in circulation at the end, by the 30th year?
25.
Exactly. Now, holy cow, things are really tight. I mean, we can't pay half of our bills. We've got to be looking for cutbacks all over the place. The utopian government, their treasury may not even be able to wait a full 10 years. They may have to call me sooner, but let's just say they call me at 10 years. This time the utopian treasury says, all right, we got to get back to our sweet spot. I'm more than happy to oblige. I go in the back. I print off $25 more million worth of currency, put it in an armored truck, send it to the utopian treasury. Now, they're back to whole, in a sense, because they've got $50 million back in circulation. And what does it look like on my side of the balance sheet? Well, I've now issued $50 million in year one, $15 million in year 10, $20 million in year 20, and I just got done doing another $25 million in year 30. Well, I'm now earning interest on $110 million worth of treasury bills. Okay? And Tony, what does that come out to at 3%? What are we looking at? Roughly 3.3 million, roughly. 3% of 110 million.
Yeah, 3.3 million.
Okay. So nothing else has changed. Everyone's still earning $30,000 a year. There's still 1,000 people. My personal bank collects $6 million. I keep 3.3 million of it, which means now I'm only sending 2.7 million back to the Treasury. And that's just less money for roads, less for infrastructure. Things are starting to get tight in general, and we're starting to see these cycles happen where every 10 years when this infusion of cash happens, or right before the infusion of cash happens, things get really tight, which we see happening today in the form of potential government shutdowns, unless, of course, they agree to borrow more money. I convince, as the treasurer, 10 more years go by. We've been removing $3.3 million per year. So first of all, does everyone follow me so far?
Yeah.
At the end of that 30th year, I'm keeping over half of the tax income of the population, and I'm sending the remainder to the Treasury. Now, at the end of the 40th year, we've had now another decade where $3.3 million per year is being removed from circulation. How much is in circulation in the 40th year?
17.
Exactly, $17 million. Well, I personally don't think they're going to make it to the 40th year, but bear with me one more time because somehow they found a way to do it. By that 40th year, there is less than $20 million in circulation. We calculate about $17 million. And that's because I've been removing $3.3 million per year for the last decade. Utopia really can't wait that long, but let's pretend they do. So there's only 17 million in circulation on that 40th year. The economy's almost falling apart. There's almost rioting. People are nervous. How much money do they need to get back to whole again?
33 million.
33 million. Guess what? Treasurer from Utopia calls me up, says, hey, we got to be made whole again. I say, fine. I run off $33 million worth of currency, put it in armored trucks, send it to the Treasury of Utopia. They're now whole again. I'm now earning interest on, it was at 110 million.
143.
Thank you. Now I'm earning interest on 143 million. And let's just make it 140 million. Let's just say I gave Utopia a break. Okay? I'm earning 3% on $140 million per year. How much is that for me?
4.2.
140 million times 3% equals 4.2 million. At the end of the 41st year, I collect taxes from the population. Everything stays the same. They send me $6 million. I keep my 4.2 million, and I send the remainder, a paltry 1.8 million, to the Utopian Treasury. You guys follow me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're starting off, even right after a cash infusion, trouble's starting to rear its ugly head almost immediately. Now, they're just not going to make it to the 50th year. Because if I'm collecting 4.2 million per year for the next decade, I'm basically going to take that's going to eat up all of the currency that's in circulation. They're just not going to make it. That would be $42 million, leaving only $8 million in circulation. This is cataclysmic to a people. Utopia treasurer calls me up. He needs $42 million more. I say, fine. We swap T-bills. Armored car delivers. $42 million more is added to the debt. I was a nice guy. I had rounded it down to $140 million a decade ago. We're now up to $182 million. You guys following me on this?
Yep.
Okay. Tony, what is 3% of $182 million? Because I own $182 million worth of Treasury.
About $5.5 million.
5.46 million. Yep. So by the end of that 50th year, pretty much all the tax revenue of all the people of this country, all their labor, all their hard work, everything they do is going to do nothing but pay the interest. There's a paltry little bit left. There's what, $540,000 left over? 51st year, I collect everyone's taxes. We know it's $6 million. I keep $5.46 million, and I send roughly $500,000 to the Treasury. Well, that's just not going to cut it. And roads are falling apart. Government employees are being laid off. There's instability everywhere. And it doesn't matter what gets downsized or whether Obamacare gets repealed. It does not matter. This problem is unfixable by design. Since I'm taking out roughly 5.5 million per year, starting in year 50, can they even wait another decade?
No.
They can't. Because remember, there's only 50 million in circulation. Now that means that sometime before the full decade's up, I'm going to be getting another call from the treasurer because they're not going to make it. Now you start to understand how time frequency starts to get condensed, and you're going to start to see this hyperbolic curve. So, any questions so far?
Nope.
No.
So, the Treasury, the government of Utopia cannot wait another decade. They call me up in year 55. I've been keeping $5.46 million for the last 5 years. How much is in circulation right now? Tony, you got a calculator?
23 something.
Exactly. So in the 55th year, they need $27.3 million to get back to their sweet spot. I say, okay. Now, keep in mind, as this is happening, utopian debt is skyrocketing. I print off $27.3 million more dollars. Armored truck goes to the utopian treasury. They're back at $50 million for just a little bit. But the very next year, I have now put $210 million into the utopian economy, and I'm now earning interest at 3% on that $210 million. Well, that means literally from the 55th year on, all of the labor of Utopia, all of it, all of the income, all of the tax income is going just to pay my interest. Okay? That means that in the 56th year, since I'm going to be keeping all the money from that tax revenue from year 55 on, because I'm not even collecting enough to pay myself. That means now the treasurer from Utopia is now calling me every single year because he's not getting any money at the end of tax season. There used to be some left over, but now there's not. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah.
You're 300 grand in debt every time.
So now the rate at which new money needs to be funneled in to the economy, the period between infusions begins to shrink. The amount of debt starts to get crazy. Now they have to start doing this every year. And maybe the amounts are a little smaller, but since they're doing them every year, if you carry this experiment on, now we've already, in 55 years, I'm already in complete control of the economy. Now, I'm also doing a lot of other things on the side. Utopia can't pay its debts without coming to me with their hat in their hand. They now need my quote-unquote goodwill just to make it through another term. If I happen to like the president of Utopia that year and I don't want trouble to come to him, maybe I won't keep my interest payment. I'll just let my government or the utopian government have it that particular year, that particular period, especially if it's a politician that is loyal to me, for instance. So what we're being set up for here is obviously an economic catastrophe that I'm in complete control of. Now remember, I wanted to control this thing from the beginning. The whole time this has been happening, I'm hidden back away behind a few business titles and behind guys. You really don't even know who I am. And of course, because I'm also loaning the money to banks that I have an interest in, I'm making sure of a lot of things. Now, in my mind, I know that I'm going to be the king of Utopia, but I don't want to use that title because it sounds bad in a free society. And like I said, along the way, I've been doing a lot of things. I've perhaps, I started maybe gathering people that were highly loyal to me. Maybe I funded some secret societies, and the members that passed all the initiations and really proved their loyalty, they were willing to do anything for me, like spit on the cross of Jesus Christ. I might reward them because you don't think I'm connected? I am the key to everyone's wealth. So if I like you and you've proven yourself to me, I will give you great positions in the media or in entertainment or the military, or I might fund your political campaign. I'm going to make a success out of you. Plus, I'm going to need help people to run things once I'm king. Along the way, I've installed my people into the military, people that are loyal to me, even more loyal to me than they are to the United States of Utopia, than to the utopian federal government. After all, I'm the one that's putting food on their table. I've taken over the education system, too. Of course, I put my own guys at the top of these positions, very well paid. But since they're loyal to me, they're going to listen to me when I say, look, I want you to devise an educational system so that the utopian people never get wise to what we're doing here. Let's remove critical thinking from the schools. Let's teach them to maybe just follow authority. Teach them things such that they'll never be able to figure out this scam, or so few of them will that we'll be able to silence them easily. I'm going to own the politicians. Because remember, what did I have to give up to get all this power?
Paper.
What did I give up to get all this power?
Ink in your printer.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, Howard, how much does paper cost? How much does ink cost?
Not that much.
Right.
Not that much. You know what? I'm willing to go buy a printer for this luxury, for this power. I own politicians. I own the media. And to dovetail with the educational system, I make sure that everyone that's in a position of power in the media are my guys. And if media entities pop up here and there and I don't like their message, guess what? I'll make a few phone calls to a few friends at my banks. They need me. They've got to be loyal to me. I'll say, why don't you call in XYZ Media Company's loan? I don't like what they're saying. Well, guess what? I can shut down an entire broadcasting service if I want to, and no one's ever even known my name. I own the media, and I use it to keep people stupid, and I use the media to keep blaming the elected officials. Keep the spotlight off of me. I'm in the background. Let's blame the politicians. They're not doing their job. And this is what I was getting at when David, when you were talking about Duterte and Chavez. There's nothing they can do. It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do save for declare the debt illegal, wipe it out completely. You'll have to take over the military overnight. We're talking revolution, a coup, whatever you want to call it. But again, keep in mind, along the way, I've been putting my guys into the military because I'm not dumb. I know that some people might try to oppose my kingship, even if I call it something else. Through my interests, through what I want, I influence everything. I influence what the people of Utopia want, what they purchase, what they sell. I do it because I control who gets the money. I only give the money to people whose message I like or that dovetails with mine. If I want a strong military because I want to invade, island XYZ across the lake, well, I'm going to use the media to instill a sense of fear of XYZ. And I'm going to get the budget dollars for the military increased every year as it goes through Congress. And we're going to put money into technology and into weapons and arms. Now, of course, XYZ is really not a threat to us. Or maybe they are. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, those weapons are really to keep the utopian people from ever usurping my kingship. So as the generation, even after 50 years, we've got about 2 generations in there. The people are starting, it's working. They're starting to get brainwashed. They're getting lazy. They're getting stupid. They're ripe for a takeover, and they'll never see what's coming. And here's the beauty of this deal. Because I'm going to use the media. Now, they've kept me anonymous this whole time. But when the time comes, I'm going to present a solution that's going to make me the hero. Because I don't want to rule and be opposed. I want them to love me. I want them to want to be my subjects. The media, again, they've been blaming the politicians. I'm going to come in, it will have been prearranged, I'm going to come in as the big hero. I might even suggest, let's forget this whole currency thing. Let's, I don't know, why don't we install a chip in everyone? And it'll keep track of your account balances. In fact, everyone that does it, I'll throw $20,000 in to get started. And everyone seems pretty happy. They don't have to deal with money, the disease that gets passed around by the touching of it. Of course, now I'm now in complete control of society. And if I didn't like what someone was doing, I could just turn off their chip or their mark, whatever you want to call it. And this system literally would be a beast. It would be a governmental system that I introduced. And my point that I'm making here is the hero or the king of this nation is what the Bible would call the Antichrist. And if you read Revelation 13:16 to 17, it says, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." And at that point, I think I might put my name on the currency or on the mark, because no one is going to be able to usurp me. How could they ever? I've been investing in surveillance technology the whole time. If someone even starts talking about it, you think Hitler was ruthless? It'll get shut up so fast it'll be laughable. We're on the brink of this. The Bible predicted this 2,000 years ago. Now, we haven't talked about all the other mechanisms that we've talked about on other shows. We haven't talked about those today. We are just talking currency. And you understand the position that guys like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen and Rodrigo Duterte are in. They're up against the devil, literally. And even if they do everything right, they're playing into a rigged system which has no hope of success, save for one possibility, and that is literally a military coup, which goes against the very foundation and ideals of our country. Because the day that debt would be declared illegal, I guarantee you war will break out all over the world. What are your thoughts about all that?
I think it's it's spot on, and it's a really good way to simplify a super complex situation, because the way you laid that out, and when you refer to it as fiat currency, it's important to define that, because what that means is at will. So,
I didn't. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So when you refer to fiat currency, it's literally at will. So anything done through fiat is tyrannical by definition. So what you illustrated there is really beautiful, because not the evil part of it, just the way you illustrate it, because here you basically create a bunch of money from thin air, which is fiat. It's at will. You just print it. It's not based on anything. It's got no intrinsic value whatsoever. But the people's labor does have intrinsic value because it's their labor. I mean, people work till they break. Some people die at work. So you're collecting actual real money that was created with fake money and reinfusing the broken government with more fake money. And that's exactly what has transpired here in the U.S. is what you just described, and elsewhere also.
This is global.
Yeah.
But you understand now what Charles Lindbergh meant when he said the people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed? Or Reginald McKenna, he's British. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and this is basically like the British Treasury. He said, and this was in 1924, "I'm afraid that the ordinary citizen will not like to be told that the banks can and do create money, and they who control the credit of a nation direct the policy of the government and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people.
Yeah.
The warnings from history are it's every year since almost the beginning of time.
Well, it's certainly Old Testament. It's certainly Constitution, which is interesting, the correlation there, because I think it's in Leviticus, probably Deuteronomy, talking about honest weights and measures, honest scales, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And currency is a dishonest scale. It's not based on anything. So you can't...
Aren't there several messages in there? Now, this was targeted at the Jews about not charging interest, that is very frowned upon by God?
Yes, that's true. And actually, all debt was to be, if it wasn't paid off, was to be forgiven every 7 years, which is the Shemitah
Wonderful
cycle.
point.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You don't think God saw this coming?
Oh, he actually warned us against it. And the founding here, our framers and founders of this nation actually put that in writing as well, that they didn't want, I think it's Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. No state shall coin its own money or pay any debt with anything other than gold and silver, referring directly to the honest scales, weights, and measures referred to in the Bible as prescribed by God himself. So, the paper currency based on nothing, printing presses, this is in the face of God directly. It's smacking him in the face, saying, "No, we'll just do what we want." And it's the only way, printing money, that you could fund any of the big wars that we fought. Just or not.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think Hitler was no more powerful than Ethiopia is today? In 1932 when he comes to power.
Yeah.
Who do you think financed him?
Well, you just described the folks that did it.
Yeah, and I got to give you credit, Hooper. You used the amount of time perfectly because we're down to about 30 seconds.
It was awesome.
If there are any parting thoughts before we sign off, now's the time to make them, guys.
I think it was awesome.
Yeah, it was a good presentation. You showed me something. I just never put it all together.
All right, the one thing I do want to leave you with is this. There's nothing that we on this show can do, or any of us, frankly, can do to correct our financial situation in this country. The reason we're telling you about this, because there really is nothing even the president can do. The people that do this praise the enemy of God, and they have a plan, and that plan involves more than money. It involves trapping your soul. And that is where, if you start to do your homework and get your head out of the sand, listeners, realize what's really going on in this world, what's really fueling wars. Doesn't mean you won't fight in one, but you can make it so that this life does become a victory to you because your soul does not get trapped on this prison planet. And you do that by acknowledging who Jesus Christ was. Find out who he is. He is your only way out of this prison. And I'll leave it with that.
Amen.
That's perfect.
This has been Down the Rabbit Hole. We will see you next week.